David, born into a devout Christian family, was showered with his parents' love and unwavering guidance in the ways of God. Every Sunday found them together in church, praying as a family. Young David observed their devotion, but as he grew, his path began to diverge. Instead of embracing his parents' teachings, he sought a different kind of life, one filled with parties, numerous companions, and a carefree existence. His parents, noticing his shift, grew increasingly worried. "David," they would often plead, "you need to stop this and give your life to God. You should really consider becoming a pastor." But David remained unreceptive. "That's not my life," he'd respond, longing for freedom and an escape from responsibility. One day, his mother, her face etched with sorrow, sat him down. "David," she began, tears welling in her eyes, "I love you so much. If you don't change, I don't know what will become of you. I might even harm myself. I can't bear to see you throw your life away." Her words struck David deeply. He loved his mother dearly, and the thought of losing her was unbearable. This stark realization forced him to reevaluate his choices. He understood that a change was necessary, not just for himself, but for his family's peace of mind as well. Reluctantly, David agreed to commit his life to God. His mother, visibly relieved and grateful, embraced him tightly. "Thank you, David," she whispered. "I knew you could find your way back." After countless discussions and under considerable parental influence, David finally conceded to fully dedicate his life to God and pursue a path as a pastor. He eventually opened his own church, and for a time, everything appeared to flourish. People flocked to hear him speak about faith and kindness, and he found a sense of fulfillment in his work. His parents beamed with pride, and David, witnessing his congregation grow, was genuinely happy. Yet this period of contentment was short-lived. Another man of God, Pastor Jerry, established a church nearby, and his congregation quickly swelled. Pastor Jerry gained renown for performing miracles, and soon many from David's church began to attend services there instead. Stories circulated of the sick being healed, prayers being answered, and problems vanishing. People yearned for miracles, and Pastor Jerry's church seemed to offer just that. As more and more parishioners departed, David's church grew increasingly empty. The pews that once overflowed with people now sat vacant. David felt a growing sense of disappointment and anxiety. He began to question himself, wondering if he was somehow falling short. He didn't perform miracles. His ministry focused simply on teaching about faith, love, and living a virtuous life. One Sunday, only a handful of people attended his service. David's heart sank, his confidence visibly faltering. He found himself thinking, maybe I'm not a good enough pastor. Maybe people don't want to hear what I have to say. That night, David sat with his parents. His mother, noticing the sadness on his face, gently inquired, "What's wrong, David?" "Mom," he began, "people are leaving. They're going to Pastor Jerry's church. He performs miracles, and I don't. I feel like I'm failing." His mother listened patiently before responding. "David, remember why you started this journey. It wasn't about miracles. It was about sharing the message of love and faith. God has a plan for everyone. Trust in Him and He will show." David thought deeply about his mother's words. He realized that despite the mounting difficulties, he had to remain true to his original purpose. A newfound resolve hardened within him. He would not give up. Every morning, David rose early, stepping out into the streets to preach to anyone who would listen. He walked through the city, sharing messages of God's love and forgiveness, fueled by the hope of drawing new members to his struggling church. One morning, as he spoke, a familiar face approached him. It was a woman who had once been among his most loyal parishioners, but who had since departed to join Pastor Jerry's thriving congregation. She looked at David, shaking her head slowly. "Look at you, Pastor David," she scoffed, her voice tinged with disdain. "You call yourself a pastor, but you perform no miracles. I used to attend your church, but I stopped. Your church is nothing but a waste of time, filled with empty words. At Pastor Jerry's church, we witness true miracles." David felt the sting of her words, yet he forced himself to remain calm. "I know Pastor Jerry's church is popular and people are naturally drawn to miracles," he replied, his voice steady. "But the message of God encompasses far more than just miracles. It's about faith, about love, and about trusting in God even when we don't see immediate signs." The woman merely laughed, shaking her head again. "Miracles are the undeniable proof that God is present," she declared firmly. "If you were truly working for God, you would perform miracles too. That's precisely why I stopped coming to your nonsense church." David's heart sank. He genuinely cared for his church and longed for people to feel welcome, but he knew he couldn't compel anyone to stay. Even as he tried to persuade her to return, she remained resolute. Before she finally walked away, she turned back and delivered a final, stinging remark. "If you want people to come to your church, start showing God's power. Words aren't enough." After she left, David stood there, utterly defeated. Her words echoed in his mind, filling him with self-doubt. Maybe she's right, he thought. Maybe people won't believe in my message if they don't see miracles. Overwhelmed by defeat after the woman's harsh critique, David returned home that night, frustrated and utterly exhausted. He sat with his mother, the weight of his despair evident in his voice. "Mom, I'm done," he declared, his frustration boiling over. "This isn't the life I want. People are abandoning my church. They claim I lack God's power because I don't perform miracles. No one is coming anymore." His mother looked at him with kind, understanding eyes. "David, I know this is difficult," she said softly. "But you need to be strong and patient. Rome wasn't built in a day. With time, your church will grow. Trust in God and don't give up." But David was too upset to listen. He shook his head angrily, pushed himself up, and stormed out of the house. He walked down the lonely streets, feeling completely lost, his mind swirling with questions and doubt. He wondered if he was even meant to be a pastor at all. As he walked alone beneath the moonlight, an old man suddenly materialized out of nowhere. David was startled. The man possessed a wise face, his hair and beard as white as snow, and his eyes sparkled as if he held all the answers. "David, my son," the old man said in a gentle voice, "I see you are worried. Tell me what troubles you." David was shocked. He had never seen this man before. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice laced with confusion. The old man simply smiled and replied, "I am here to help you. I know about your church, and I know how hard you've tried. But let me tell you something, David. Pastor Jerry uses special powers to heal the sick and make miracles happen. His powers don't come from faith alone. If you want to be like Pastor Jerry and have a full church, you must go the spiritual way." David felt a chill run down his spine. "Are you saying he uses dark powers?" he whispered. The old man nodded slowly. "Yes, David. There are powers that can make miracles happen, but they are not from God. If you want to make people believe in you, you can use these powers too." David shook his head firmly. "No, that goes against everything I believe. I want people to come to my church because of God's love, not because of tricks." The old man looked at him and smiled mysteriously. "I understand. But remember this. If you ever change your mind, just shout, 'Der be great one,' 3 times, and I will appear. I can give you the power you desire." With that, the old man disappeared into the shadows as quickly as he had appeared, leaving David alone on the dark street. David walked home deep in thought. He knew he could never use dark powers, but he also desperately wanted his church to grow. As he lay in bed that night, he couldn't stop thinking about what the old man had said. The temptation was strong, but he knew it was wrong. "No, I won't do it," he finally said to himself. "I want to do this the right way. I'll go to Pastor Jerry in the morning and ask him to show me the way. Maybe there's something I can learn from him." David felt more at peace with his decision and closed his eyes, hoping for a better tomorrow. The next morning, David put on his best suit and went to see Pastor Jerry. He had decided to ask him directly how he had managed to build his church so rapidly. When he arrived at Pastor Jerry's office, he greeted him politely. "Good morning, Pastor Jerry," David began. "I want to be like you. I want my church to be full like yours." Pastor Jerry looked confused. "What do you mean, David?" David took a deep breath and continued. "I know you use special powers to perform miracles. Please show me the way. Tell me how to make my church grow like yours." Hearing this, Pastor Jerry's expression hardened, his face turning angry. "David, what are you saying? I don't use any special powers. Everything I do is with the power of God. You shouldn't come here and accuse me like this." But David, blinded by his own assumptions, didn't believe him. "Stop lying!" he shouted, his voice rising. "Your church has only been open for a few months, and you already have 2 branches. People say you heal the sick and make miracles happen. I know it's not just God's power. Show me the way." Pastor Jerry had had enough. He stood up and pointed emphatically to the door. "David, you have no faith and you don't trust God. You think miracles are just tricks. You're speaking nonsense, and I won't allow it in my church." David felt a mix of anger and embarrassment. Pastor Jerry's words stung, but he tried one last time. "Please, Pastor Jerry, just show me how you do it." But Pastor Jerry shook his head, shouting, "Get out! Don't ever come back to my church!" Feeling utterly defeated, David turned and left. As he walked away, he felt ashamed and confused, wondering if he'd ever find a way to make his church grow without resorting to the wrong path. When David returned to his small office, he felt a profound sadness and frustration. He replayed Pastor Jerry's harsh words in his mind, along with his own desperate attempt to find a shortcut for his church's growth. As he sat at his desk, he vividly recalled the old man's words from the night before. With a mixture of fear and excitement, a decision solidified within him. He would call the old man. "Great one! Great one! Great one!" David shouted. Suddenly the air around him began to shimmer, and the old man appeared with a booming laugh, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "I knew you would call me, David. I see you are so desperate for power. Don't worry, I will help you. But first, you must go on a day's journey to another world." David's heart raced. "Another world? What do you mean?" he asked, feeling a strange mix of fear and curiosity. The old man smiled, his white beard fluttering slightly in the breeze. "This world is full of secrets and magic, but it can be dangerous too. You will need to complete some rituals to gain the powers you seek. Are you ready for this journey?" David took a deep breath, feeling the immense weight of his decision. He desperately wanted to prove himself and help his church flourish, even if it meant stepping into the unknown. "Yes, I'm ready," he replied, his voice firm. "Good," the old man said, his tone serious. "But remember, you must follow my instructions carefully. The journey will be long, and you will face challenges along the way. Only the brave can succeed." With that, the old man waved his hand, and suddenly the room around David began to transform. The walls melted away, and he found himself standing at the edge of a dark, ancient forest. The trees loomed high, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. A thick mist hung low in the air, and David felt a profound chill run down his spine. "Follow the path and don't stray from it," the old man instructed, his voice echoing. "The journey will take you to the spiritual world. You will need to find 3 magical items to complete the rituals." David nodded, a mix of excitement and fear swirling within him. He stepped onto the path, which was narrow and winding, barely visible amidst the encroaching foliage. As he walked, strange sounds echoed around him. Whispers in the wind, rustling leaves, and the distant guttural roar of something large and unseen. After walking for what felt like hours, David reached a clearing where he saw the first magical item: a shining golden feather. It floated above a small, tranquil pond, glimmering ethereally in the dim light. David reached out to grasp it, but suddenly a colossal shadow moved behind him. He turned quickly to see a giant, dark creature emerging from the dense trees. Its eyes glowed an angry red, and it let out a fierce, earth-shaking roar. David's heart pounded as he realized he had to act fast. He remembered the old man's words about bravery. "Leave me alone," David shouted, trying to sound courageous despite his trembling knees. The creature snarled but paused, seemingly taken aback by his unexpected defiance. In that crucial moment, David lunged for the golden feather and grasped it tightly. As soon as his fingers closed around it, a warm, protective light enveloped him, and the creature shrieked in fear, retreating rapidly back into the encompassing shadows. Breathing heavily, David knew he had to keep going. He continued down the path until he reached a dark cave. Inside, he could see a glowing blue crystal resting on a pedestal. But as he stepped closer, he noticed that the cave was guarded by a swirling mist that whispered strange, ethereal words. "Only the true-hearted can pass," the mist hissed. David paused, reflecting on his arduous journey and his earnest desire to help his church. He raised his chin, his voice echoing with conviction. "I want to serve God and help others." At that very moment, the swirling mist parted, allowing him to easily retrieve the crystal. The instant he touched it, a surge of raw energy flowed through him. Finally, David made his way to the last stop, a high, desolate mountain where a gleaming silver chalice awaited him. As he began his ascent, the wind howled fiercely around him, relentlessly trying to push him back down. He stumbled but pressed on, his determination unwavering, compelled to reach the summit. When he finally reached the top, the chalice glowed with an intense brilliance. David carefully picked it up, and a powerful, exhilarating feeling washed over him. With all 3 magical items now in his possession, David felt a complex mix of fear and excitement. He knew he had completed the arduous tasks, but he still wondered what exactly would happen next. As he turned to leave, he saw the old man waiting for him at the edge of the mountain. "You have done well, David," the old man said, a wide grin spreading across his face. "Now return to your world. and you will have the power you seek. But remember, with great power comes great responsibility. Use it wisely." With a final wave of his hand, the old man opened a shimmering portal. David stepped through, feeling the immense weight of his decisions pressing down on his shoulders. He had chosen a dangerous path, but he was resolute in his determination to find a way to help his church grow. As he emerged back in his office, he clutched the golden feather, the blue crystal, and the silver chalice tightly. He knew he was about to begin a new chapter in his journey, a chapter that promised both challenges and profound power. The next day, Pastor David woke with a strange, expectant feeling in his heart. He had completed the old man's ritual, holding the golden feather, blue crystal, and silver chalice. Today, he thought, I will show people the power I now hold. He put on his best clothes and ventured out to preach in the streets, feeling more confident than ever before. As he walked, he spotted a small crowd gathered around a crippled man who was unable to walk. David felt a surge of excitement. This was his chance, his opportunity to display his newfound power to the people. He approached the crippled man and, stretching out his hand, commanded, "Rise and walk," calling upon the powers he believed he had received. But nothing happened. The crippled man looked at him with confusion, as did the surrounding crowd. Whispers began to spread, and soon laughter and mocking words filled the air. "Look at this fake pastor," one man shouted. "He promised a miracle, and nothing happened." Another laughed. David's face flushed crimson with embarrassment. The crowd's voices grew louder, branding him a fraud, a liar, and a fake pastor. Overwhelmed with shame, he turned and ran back to his church, his heart pounding with a mix of anger and confusion. When he finally reached his empty church, he slammed the door shut and shouted in a desperate burst of frustration, "Great One! Great One! Great One!" The old man appeared before David, smiling as if he'd been waiting for him. "Well, well, David," he said, his eyes gleaming. "What's wrong? Why did you lie to me?" David yelled, his face red with anger. "You promised me powers, but they didn't work. I was embarrassed out there." The old man chuckled. "Oh, I forgot to mention one little thing. There is a fourth step to the ritual." David felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. "What do you mean, a fourth step? You never told me that before." The old man's smile widened, taking on a chilling quality. "You need to make a sacrifice. A human sacrifice." David's eyes went wide with horror. "Are you kidding me? A human sacrifice? This is madness." The old man's face grew serious, his gaze unwavering. "No, it's not madness. It's power. If you want true power, you must be willing to give up what you love most." David instinctively stepped back, fear gripping him. "Who do I have to sacrifice?" he stammered. The old man looked at him closely, his voice a low, steady hum. "Tell me, David, who do you love most in this world?" David's heart began to pound uncontrollably. He thought about his family, about the one person who had always stood by him and whispered, "My mother. She's always supported me and believed in me." The old man's smile grew dark, predatory. "Yes, your mother is the one you must sacrifice." David's whole body went cold, a wave of revulsion washing over him. He shook his head violently in horror. "You're out of your mind, old man. I would never harm my mother." The old man's eyes narrowed, and his dark smile vanished. "Watch your tongue, or you may lose it," he warned, his voice a low growl. "If you truly want the power you asked for, this is the only way. You have 3 days to decide. David felt utterly trapped. He desperately wanted the power, but the thought of hurting his mother was unthinkable. He loved her more than anything. "What if I don't do it?" David asked, his voice barely a whisper. The old man's gaze turned ominously dark. "If you refuse, the power you tried to gain will turn against you. You will lose your mind, and in 3 days you will die." With those chilling words, the old man disappeared, leaving David alone in his empty church, the dire warning echoing in the suffocating silence. David sank to his knees, his mind racing with fear and profound sadness. He realized that his insatiable desire for power had led him down a terrifyingly dark path. And now, he was faced with an impossible choice. Every second felt heavy, and he felt completely lost, torn between his deep love for his mother and the seductive promise of power. David went home that night, with tears streaming down his face, feeling utterly lost and defeated. As he entered the house, his father immediately noticed his sorrowful expression and asked gently, "David, what's wrong? Why are you so upset?" David didn't want to answer at first. He just shook his head, struggling to hold back his tears. But his father persisted, unwilling to see his son in such pain. Finally, David gave in, though he chose to lie. "I'm losing members every day at the church, Dad. People are leaving because they don't see any miracles. And I feel like a failure." His father placed a reassuring hand on David's shoulder and looked him directly in the eyes. "David, you must be patient with God," he said softly. "Building something strong takes time, and faith is not about quick results. Do not let yourself be tempted into taking shortcuts." That night, as David lay in bed, the old man appeared at his bedside, his eyes gleaming ominously in the dim light. He held a deep red cloth in his hands and looked at David with a stern, serious expression. "Take this cloth," he commanded. The old man commanded, his voice cold and direct. "Go to your mother's room and cover her with it while she sleeps. Only then will the power be yours." David's heart pounded as he took the red cloth, feeling its strange, heavy weight. A wave of doubt washed over him, but he remembered the old man's chilling warning. He would lose his mind and die if he didn't complete the ritual. Quietly, he tiptoed down the hall to his mother's room. She lay there peacefully, her breathing soft and steady. David hesitated, looking at his mother's gentle, trusting face. But the relentless pressure of the old man's words rang in his head, growing louder and louder until he finally pulled the cloth over her, covering her completely. The next morning, David's father went to check on his wife, as he did every morning, expecting to see her warm smile greeting him. But today, there was only silence. When he touched her hand, it was cold. She didn't move, didn't breathe. A wave of gut-wrenching shock washed over him as he realized she was gone. His heart broke as he fell to his knees beside her, crying out in disbelief. "No, no, please wake up," he whispered, his voice shaking, tears streaming down his face as he clutched her hand, hoping somehow she would come back to him. He sobbed beside her bed, feeling a hollow emptiness where his joy and strength had once been. His cries echoed through the quiet, desolate house. Hearing his father's anguished cries, David walked slowly into the room, his face tense, a mask of feigned innocence. He saw his mother lying still and his father kneeling beside her, shaking uncontrollably with grief. David's heart felt like it was caught in a storm. Pain, guilt, and raw fear all tangled together. He wanted to look away, but he knew he couldn't. He was the reason his mother was gone. David took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, and knelt beside his father. He forced himself to cry, letting tears fall down his face. Some of the tears were real, for he did love his mother deeply, and now she was gone forever. But a much larger part of him cried out of overwhelming guilt, for he knew he had brought this unspeakable tragedy upon her. "Oh, Mother," David whispered, his voice cracking. "Why did this happen?" His father's sobs grew louder as he held onto his wife's hand, his face etched with unbearable heartache. David's father, in his profound grief, didn't notice the deep shadow of guilt that flickered in his son's eyes. 2 days after his mother's funeral, David returned to his church for the Sunday service. He felt tired and overwhelmingly sad, but when he arrived, his mood changed instantly. He was utterly shocked to see the building packed with people. Not only was every seat taken, but many people stood outside, peeking through windows and doors just to get a glimpse of the service. David felt a rush of excitement and smiled, a swell of pride filling his chest. In that moment, he truly believed his terrible sacrifice had finally paid off. As the service began, David stood in front of the vast crowd, and everyone listened intently to his words. People looked at him with profound respect, and for the very first time, David felt truly powerful. He introduced himself as Prophet David, proud of his new self-appointed title. His words were full of energy, and people nodded along, visibly moved by his preaching. Suddenly, a woman walked through the crowd, leading a blind man by the hand. She brought him to the front where David stood and asked, "Prophet David, please help him. He cannot see. Pray for him to be healed." David looked at the blind man, feeling both nervous and exhilarated. He remembered what the old man had promised, that with his mother's sacrifice, he would gain special powers. David lifted his hands and began to pray loudly, fervently, asking for the man's sight to be restored. The entire crowd was utterly silent, watching and waiting with bated breath. Then, something truly amazing happened. The blind man blinked, looked around, and shouted, "I can see! I can see!" His face lit up with pure joy as he looked at the crowd for the very first time. The people gasped, then erupted into thunderous cheers and applause, thrilled by the miracle they had just witnessed. Some even started to cry with joy, and many praised David, calling him a true prophet. Word about David's church spread like wildfire. People who heard about the astounding miracle wanted to come and see the prophet David for themselves. Soon, his small church became the talk of the town, and more people than ever flocked to his services. David felt happy and intensely proud of the power he now held, basking in the respect and admiration from everyone around him. As the weeks went by, David's church continued to grow at an unbelievable pace. People filled every seat every Sunday, and even more miracles were said to happen in each service. But David's father began to feel an unsettling unease. He noticed how quickly the church was expanding and started to hear whispers around town. Some people were gossiping, saying that David's success seemed strangely unnatural. And there were disturbing rumors that he might have used his own mother for some kind of ritual. One evening, David's father decided it was time to talk to him. He called David to sit down and looked him directly in the eye, his face serious but filled with profound concern. David, he began gently, I want to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. David looked at his father, his own face hardening as well. What is it, father? He asked, already feeling a defensive edge creep into his voice. His father took a deep breath and said, I've been hearing things, David. People are saying strange things about how your church is growing so fast. Some are even saying... He paused, clearly not wanting to utter the words he was about to speak. Some are saying you may have done something wrong to gain all this power. That you used your own mother. David's face darkened with instant anger. He felt insulted, as if his father was doubting him and his holy work. How could you think that, father? He said, his voice rising in indignation. I am a man of God. I prayed, and the power of God answered me. How could you even listen to such rumors? His father remained calm, though his eyes were filled with deep sadness. I just want to make sure, David. The way things changed so quickly, it doesn't feel natural. I've seen many churches grow, but never like this. David clenched his fists, struggling to hide the swirling mixture of anger and guilt within him. You don't have faith, father, he accused, his voice rising even further, though he no longer cared. Instead of supporting me, you believe these lies and rumors. He then challenged, and why don't you come to my church? Any more, father? Why don't you see for yourself the miracles that happen there? His father sighed and looked down. David, I pray for you every day, but I want you to remember one thing. There is no shortcut to true faith. Miracles don't come from just anywhere. Be careful, my son. David stood up, his heart pounding with resentment. I don't need this. I'm doing God's work, and if you can't believe in me, then maybe you shouldn't come at all. Without another word, David walked away, leaving his father alone, feeling hurt and more suspicious than ever. David's mind raced as he left the room. Part of him felt powerful, proud of his rapidly growing church and the respect he had gained. But deep inside, his father's words planted a small, persistent seed of doubt, a feeling he tried desperately to ignore. Yet the more he tried to push it away, the stronger it seemed to grow. That Sunday, the church was packed as usual. The people waited eagerly to see Prophet David perform another miracle. They watched with palpable excitement as a woman wheeled a crippled man to the front of the church. He sat in a wheelchair, his legs twisted and weak, and the crowd murmured with a mix of hope and eager anticipation. They had seen David perform miracles before, and many truly believed he could do anything. David approached the man, placing his hands firmly on his shoulders. He closed his eyes, muttering prayers with a loud, confident voice, eager to showcase his power. Rise and walk, he commanded, his voice ringing through the church. The crowd watched, holding their breath, waiting to see the man stand and walk, but the crippled man remained utterly still. He looked up at David, a bit confused. David repeated the command, this time even louder, feeling the immense pressure of all the eyes on him. I said, rise and walk, in the name of God. Still, the man didn't move. Whispers of doubt began to spread like wildfire through the crowd. David's heart pounded as he tried once more, raising his voice even louder. Get up and walk, he shouted, his voice echoing, his hands trembling slightly. The man at the wheelchair looked down, clearly unable to stand, and the crowd started to murmur, some shaking their heads in disappointment. Then one person shouted, "He's a fake! He has no power!" Others began to join in, calling him a fraud and questioning all his previous miracles. The respect David had worked so hard to build was crumbling right before his eyes. Feeling his face flush crimson with embarrassment, David turned and rushed back to his office, slamming the door shut behind him. Outside, he could still hear the crowd's voices, now louder and filled with undeniable doubt. Desperate and furious, David called out in a low, trembling voice, "Great one! Great one! Great one!" In an instant, the old man appeared, standing in the corner of the room with his usual wicked grin. His eyes were cold, watching David with an air of amusement. "Well, well," he sneered. "What's wrong, Prophet David?" David clenched his fists, his face red with uncontrollable anger. "You foolish old man!" he shouted. "You promised me power for one sacrifice. I did what you asked, and now you've taken it away. I was humiliated in front of everyone." The old man's grin faded, and his eyes narrowed. "Watch your tone, David, or I will make you blind this very moment," he hissed. David felt a shiver run down his spine, but his anger kept him standing firm. The old man continued, his voice calm but dangerously resonant. "Power comes with a price, David. Did you think one sacrifice would be enough? Power is hungry, and it needs to be fed. If you want it to stay with you, you must keep feeding it." David's heart sank as he grasped the terrifying implication of the old man's words. What do you mean?" he stammered, feeling a wave of suffocating dread. The old man's grin returned, darker and colder than before. "You need another sacrifice, David. Someone even closer to you." David's face went pale, a glacial chill gripping his heart. "Who?" he asked, barely able to speak. The old man's eyes gleamed with a sinister, triumphant joy. "Your father," he said, his voice barely a whisper. David's knees felt weak beneath him as he shook his head, horrified. "No, not my father. I can't do that." The old man's face grew dark, his chilling grin disappearing entirely. "You have no choice, David. You wanted power, didn't you? You wanted respect? Then do as I say. Bring your father as the next sacrifice, or everything you have built will come crashing down. People will see you as nothing more than a powerless fool." David felt utterly trapped, torn between his deep love for his father and his insatiable hunger for power. He thought of his father, who had always supported him, even when he was suspicious. The thought of harming him filled David with a profound sadness. But the intoxicating temptation of power still clung to him, clouding his mind, twisting his resolve. The old man leaned in close, his voice a menacing whisper. "You have 3 days, David. If you do not bring your father, I will take everything from you. Your church will fall, and you will suffer. You will feel madness creep over you until you beg for mercy." With those final chilling words, the old man disappeared, leaving David alone in his office, shaking with fear and confusion. He sank into his chair, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He thought of the crowd outside, people who had once believed in him, now openly doubting his power. Yet the horrifying price of that power was now tearing his life apart. For the first time, David felt truly lost, caught between his love for his family and his dangerous, destructive quest for power. Without thinking twice, David did as the old man instructed. That evening, when he prepared dinner for his father, he slipped a special powder the old man had given him into the food. David's heart raced with a desperate, fearful pulse. But he kept his face calm as he placed the food in front of his unsuspecting father. His father, tired after a long day, sat down at the table, ready to eat. David watched closely, barely breathing, as his father picked up his fork. But then, just before he took a bite. His father paused, put his fork down, and bowed his head in prayer. "Dear Lord, bless this food and keep us safe. Watch over us tonight and protect us from harm," his father prayed softly. David felt a sudden jolt of fear. What if his father's prayer was strong enough to stop the powder from working? He tried to push the thought away, but as his father ate, a creeping worry began to consume him. After dinner, his father seemed unusually tired. David watched as he yawned and rubbed his eyes, then slowly got up and went to his room to sleep. This must be it, David thought. By morning it will all be over. That night, David could hardly sleep. He tossed and turned, imagining the immense power he would gain and the unwavering respect he would finally command. But as morning came, his excitement morphed into a gnawing nervousness. What if something went wrong? As he sat in the living room, still half expecting devastating news, he suddenly heard footsteps down the hall. His heart stopped. Slowly, he turned his head toward the sound, and to his utter shock, he saw his father walking toward him, looking perfectly fine and cheerful. "Good morning, David," his father said with a bright smile, stretching and yawning. "Did you sleep well?" David's mouth fell open, and he couldn't speak for a moment, his mind racing. How was this possible? He was certain the powder would work. "Good morning, Dad," David managed to say, struggling to hide the profound shock on his face. His father didn't seem to notice anything strange. He simply poured himself a cup of tea, humming to himself, completely unaware of David's inner panic. David felt his heart pounding, his mind spinning. Had the powder failed, or had his father's prayer somehow protected him? David returned to his secret office, heart pounding and mind racing. He stood in the dim light and called out, "Great One! Great One! Great One!" The old man appeared, his shadowy figure looming before David. His smile was wide, but it didn't quite reach his cold eyes. "Ah, David, you've summoned me again. What troubles you now?" David's voice trembled with urgency. "My father is still alive. I followed your instructions, but the powder didn't work." "What must I do to gain the power I desire?" The old man's expression turned serious, and he leaned closer. "Your father's spirit is stronger than I had anticipated. He has a deep faith that protects him," he explained. "Then what can I do?" David pleaded, desperation creeping into his voice. The old man's smile faded, and he looked at David with a gravely serious expression. "If you truly want the power you seek, you must give up something even more valuable." David felt a profound chill run down his spine. What do you mean?" he stammered, already overwhelmed by a sense of foreboding. The old man's eyes glinted with a cold, calculated look. "Your manhood, David, the ultimate sacrifice?" David's face went utterly pale, his body stiffening in a shock so profound it stole his breath. My manhood," he whispered, barely able to get the words out. He could hardly believe what he was hearing. "Yes," the old man replied, his voice calm and steady. "This is the price of true power. Are you willing to pay it?" David felt dizzy, his mind racing, spiraling. This was too much, too far. The thought of losing such an important part of himself made him feel weak, sickened. But he also remembered his burning hunger for power, for respect, and for all the things he thought he deserved. David made the agonizing decision to go ahead with the sacrifice. He felt a dreadful mix of fear and a strange, morbid excitement as he prepared for what was to come. The old man guided him through the dark ritual, and with a swift and incredibly painful process, David lost his manhood. It was a heavy price to pay, an unimaginable sacrifice, but as the days passed, he began to feel different, powerful. Soon after the sacrifice, David's church started to grow with astonishing rapidity. People came from all over to witness the miracles he performed. The stories spread quickly, and he even opened a new branch of his church in a nearby town. David was thrilled as he stood before large crowds, preaching confidently and performing what he claimed were miraculous healings. He truly felt like a genuine prophet. One Sunday, after a particularly busy service, David's father came to visit him at the church. He looked around in awe, genuinely amazed at how successful David had become. "Son, you've done so well for yourself," he said with palpable pride. "Your church is thriving. Why don't you think about getting married? A family would make your life even more fulfilling." David smiled politely, but shook his head. "No, Dad. The Lord has not revealed the right woman for me yet," he replied, attempting to sound convincing. Inside, he felt a faint twinge of doubt. Was it truly the Lord's will? Or was it just his own deep-seated fear of attachment? His father nodded, though a look of concern subtly crossed his face. "You know, having someone by your side can bring immense joy and strength. It's important to have love in your life." David, however, brushed off his father's words. "I have my church, and that is my sole focus right now. I need to continue my work and spread the message." As the weeks went by, the church continued to grow at an unprecedented rate, and David reveled in the adoration of his ever-increasing followers. Yet late at night, when the crowds had gone home and a profound silence filled the church, he sometimes felt a pervasive loneliness. Despite all his success, there was a quiet, persistent part of him that wondered if he had truly made the right choices. But every time those unsettling thoughts crept in, he forcefully pushed them away, reminding himself of the immense power he now possessed and the unwavering respect he had earned. He was determined to stay focused on his divine mission, even if it meant sacrificing love and companionship. After all, he had paid an unimaginably high price for his power, and he wasn't about to let it slip away. One day, as David was greeting members after a Sunday service, his eyes fell upon a young woman named Anointed. She was kind, deeply dedicated to the church, and always eager to learn more about faith. David felt an immediate, undeniable connection to her, something he hadn't experienced in a very long time. As weeks passed, David and Anointed started spending more and more time together, talking after services and even meeting outside of church. David felt truly, genuinely happy in her presence and slowly realized he was falling deeply in love. He couldn't remember the last time he felt so close to someone, and Anointed's warmth made him feel alive in a way that preaching and performing miracles never had. Eventually, Anointed noticed David's growing affection, and soon they began dating. She loved how dedicated David was to his church, and respected his unwavering commitment. However, one day, as they were talking, she delicately brought up the topic of intimacy. She looked at him with a shy smile and said, "David, we're in love. Don't you think we should take the next step in our relationship?" David quickly cleared his throat, a sudden wave of panic washing over him. He looked into her eyes and said, "Anointed, I believe in doing things the right way. I think we should get married before taking that step. Anointed respected David's faith and commitment, and she agreed, believing it was because he was a true man of God. She smiled and nodded. "All right, David, I'll wait. I admire your faith." David felt a wave of relief, grateful that she seemed to understand. But deep down, he knew there was far more to his hesitation. He felt the immense weight of the secret he was hiding, a truth that could shatter everything if Anointed ever found out. Just 2 months after David and Anointed were married, David's father couldn't hide his excitement. One evening, as they all sat together after a family dinner, his father leaned over with a warm smile. "David, my son," he began, his voice filled with tender anticipation. "I can't wait to carry my grandchildren. It will be such a joy for me to see the next generation." David forced a smile, nodding. "Me too, Dad. I look forward to starting a family with Anointed." Anointed, seated beside him, reached over and squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with joy and hopeful anticipation for the future. She, too, dreamed of having children, of filling their home with laughter and love. But as David spoke, a sharp pang of worry stirred within him, knowing the devastating truth he hadn't shared. Weeks turned into months, and Anointed started to feel a quiet, gnawing worry growing inside her. Since they had been married, David had not once made any move toward intimacy. At first, she thought it was just a part of his strong faith. Or perhaps he was waiting for a truly special moment. But as time wore on, her patience slowly turned into confusion, and her confusion deepened into a painful insecurity. One evening, Anointed decided she had to confront him. She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts, and went to David as he sat in his study. "David," she began softly, her voice trembling slightly, "I need to understand something. Why haven't we, shared any intimate moments? We're married now. Is there something wrong?" David paused, clearly caught off guard by her direct question. He looked at her with a forced calmness and replied, "The Lord has not given me the instruction to take that step yet, Anointed. We have to be patient and follow his guidance." Anointed tried to smile, but David's evasive answer left her feeling more confused and unsettled than before. As she returned to her room that night, her mind raced with a torrent of thoughts and agonizing questions. She looked at herself in the mirror, wondering if there was something profoundly wrong with her. Was she not attractive enough? Was she not what he expected? As the weeks continued to unfold, Anointed's suspicions grew stronger and more defined. She noticed little things about David that hadn't caught her attention before. How he consistently avoided eye contact when she gently brought up their marriage. The way he always seemed distant, even when they were home together. It was as if he was physically present, but his spirit was somewhere else entirely. One evening, as Anointed prepared dinner, David sat silently, completely lost in his own troubled thoughts. She set the table, hoping the warm, comforting meal would encourage him to finally open up, but he barely touched his food, merely poking at it with his fork. "David," she began gently, her voice full of concern, "is something troubling you? I feel like you're drifting away. We are married now, but I feel more alone than ever." David looked up, forcing a small, strained smile. "I'm just focused on my duties as a pastor, Anointed. The church is growing, and there are so many people who need guidance. It's a lot of responsibility." Anointed nodded, trying to be understanding, but she couldn't shake the persistent feeling that there was something more, something he wasn't telling her. That night, while David was away at a church meeting, she decided to pray. She knelt by her bedside, pouring her heart out, asking for strength, wisdom, and understanding. The next Sunday, Anointed sat in the front row as David preached. The church was fuller than ever, with people standing outside just to hear his words. David's sermons had indeed become even more powerful, and he was now widely known as a prophet. People traveled from far and wide, hoping for his prayers and blessings. But something still didn't feel right to Anointed. While others saw David as a man of God, she could sense the heavy, unspoken weight he was carrying in silence. After the service, David went to his office, and Anointed decided to confront him once more. She knocked on the door and entered, finding him sitting there deep in thought. "David," she said firmly, "I know you're hiding something from me. I'm your wife. Please let me help you." David looked up, his eyes filled with an emotion she couldn't quite decipher. Just then, there was a knock on the door. A church elder entered, announcing that a large crowd had gathered outside, hoping for David's prayers. Relieved for the interruption, David stood up saying, "I have to go. We'll talk about this later." As he walked out, Anointed was left alone in the office, her heart heavy with unanswered questions. That evening, when they returned home from church, Anointed decided to try once more to connect with her husband. She approached David gently, reaching out to touch his shoulder, but David quickly pulled away, saying, "I'm tired, Anointed. It's been a long day." Anointed felt a sharp pang of sadness. "David, we're husband and wife. Don't you think we should be closer? It's not just about being tired. You keep pushing me away." David's face tightened with frustration. "Anointed, do you call yourself a child of God? And yet you're always talking about love and intimacy. Why can't you focus on the church, on our mission to make it even bigger?" Anointed felt her heart sink. "So, you married me to be like a piece of furniture? Someone to just fill a space in your life?" "David, I'm not asking for anything strange. I'm your wife. I have the right to want love and connection." David's voice grew cold. "Isn't it enough that I care for you, that I provide for you? You have everything. A house, money, expensive clothes, jewelry, even a car. What more do you want?" Tears welled in Anointed's eyes as she looked at him. "David, I didn't marry you for those things. I married you because I believed you loved me. And I wanted a real partner, not just a provider. Do you even see me as your wife, or just someone you can say is by your side?" "You worry too much, Anointed," David said, his tone almost dismissive. "Do you even know who you're married to? Back in the day, I was the one everyone wanted. Women used to chase after me. You should be grateful you have me." Anointed felt his words cut deep, her heart sinking. "David, that's not why I married you. I thought we'd share everything, that you'd let me in. I want to know who you really are." For a brief moment, David's face softened, a flicker of vulnerability. But then his eyes grew cold again. "Anointed, there are things you wouldn't understand. Some things can't be spoken of. Just let it go." Feeling utterly defeated, Anointed sank into her chair, feeling a wall between them that seemed impossible to break. David turned and walked out of the room, leaving her alone with her thoughts, her dreams of a loving marriage slowly slipping away. The next day, feeling lost and deeply worried, Anointed decided to call David's father. She took a deep breath and finally spoke. "Papa, since David and I got married, he hasn't, well, he hasn't been close to me. I don't know what's wrong." David's father was silent for a moment, surprised by her words. He had expected her to share happy news, maybe even that she was expecting a baby. Clearing his throat, he said, "I thought you were calling with good news, my daughter. I thought you might tell me I'll soon be a grandfather." Anointed sighed, trying to hold back tears. "I thought so too, Papa. But David keeps saying he needs to wait on the Lord." David's father was deeply troubled. He had always wanted grandchildren, and he was beginning to worry about his son's increasingly strange behavior. That evening, he called David to visit him. When David arrived, his father sat him down with a serious look. "Son, what's going on with you? Your wife tells me you haven't been close to her since you got married. Are you all right?" David laughed it off, shaking his head. "Papa, you worry too much. I'm focused on doing the work of the Lord." But his father wasn't satisfied. "David, I understand that you want to serve, but family is important, too. Your wife deserves love and respect, and I want to see grandchildren one day. This isn't just about you." David frowned, looking away. "Papa, please understand. I have a calling. I'm doing what I believe is right." David's father sighed, feeling a heavy sadness in his heart. He looked his son directly in the eyes and said, "Son, faith is important, but so is family. You have a duty to both. Don't push those you love away." David stayed silent, unable to respond. Anointed's words and his father's earnest advice echoed in his mind as he left, his thoughts swirling. What was he truly afraid of? And how long could he keep these walls up around his heart? As months went by, some of Prophet David's church members began whispering among themselves. They had noticed that Anointed wasn't pregnant, and their curiosity quickly turned into rampant gossip. One day, after a Sunday service, a small group gathered in a corner of the churchyard. One woman with a sly smile leaned in close and whispered, "Have you noticed? Prophet David and his wife have been married for months, and still no child." Another woman raised her eyebrows, giving a knowing look. "Who knows? Maybe he used her womb for his powers. All these miracles he performs. Where do you think they come from?" A third woman shook her head, clearly uncomfortable. "You should mind your own business. Maybe God has a different plan for them. Besides, Anointed is a kind soul. Why spread rumors?" The group continued, blissfully unaware that Anointed had overheard bits of their conversation as she walked past. Her heart sank, and she quickly looked away, pretending she hadn't heard. She felt her cheeks flush with a mixture of shame and hurt. When Anointed got home that evening, she couldn't hold in her frustration any longer. She told David everything she had heard, the whispers, the hurtful accusations, and the nasty gossip. She could barely finish her words before tears welled up in her eyes. David's face grew dark with anger. "They think they can come to my church, receive blessings, and still speak against us," he muttered, clenching his fists. "I'll show them who they're dealing with." That Sunday, Prophet David stood before his congregation, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on the two women who had spread the rumors. He addressed the congregation with a voice that echoed through the building, stern and commanding. "There are some among us who think it's right to spread lies," he announced. "Some who think they can tarnish the names of God's chosen servants. You know who you are, and I won't allow such wickedness in this holy place." The two women looked down, clearly uncomfortable, their faces turning pale as the crowd murmured around them. David didn't stop there. If you think you can judge God's work without consequences, you are wrong. This is my final warning to those who gossip and lie in God's house. He pointed a condemning finger at the two women. I don't want to see either of you here again. Gasps filled the church, and the two women quickly rose from their seats, hurrying out of the church in shame. David continued his sermon as if nothing had happened, but a palpable wave of tension had fallen over the room. After the service, David called Michael, one of his loyal ushers, into his office. Michael was a humble young man who had always been devoted to the church, but he was struggling financially and often shared his troubles with David. David looked him over, a small, calculating smile playing on his lips. David paused, then said carefully, I want you to help me fulfill my duty as a husband. You know I am busy with God's work, and I can't be distracted, but it is time my wife, anointed, has a child. He fixed his gaze on Michael. If you do this, I'll make sure you're rewarded greatly. After David made his offer, Michael's eyes went wide with shock. He shook his head quickly, taking a step back. No, Prophet David, I can't do that, Michael stammered. I respect you and your wife, but this isn't right. David leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. Michael, think carefully. This is a once-in-a-lifetime chance to lift yourself and your family out of hardship. Do you think the Lord would abandon his faithful servant when there's a way to ease his suffering? Michael shook his head again, but then thoughts of his mother filled his mind. She had been in the hospital for weeks, with medical bills piling up that he simply couldn't pay. He thought of her lying there, waiting for help that never seemed to come. His heart grew heavy with guilt and worry. Finally, he looked up at David, his voice trembling. My mother, she's in the hospital. The bills are so high, and I can't pay them. He paused, struggling with his words. If I do this, will you help me cover her hospital expenses? David smiled and placed a reassuring hand on Michael's shoulder. Of course, Michael. Consider it done. You help me, and I'll make sure your mother gets the care she needs. Michael took a deep breath, feeling the crushing weight of his decision. Okay, I'll do it, he said quietly. But listen, David added, his tone serious and warning. You must not tell anyone about this. It has to stay between us. If anyone finds out, it could ruin everything. Do you understand? Michael nodded, a mix of fear and grim determination in his eyes. I understand. I won't tell anyone. With that, the two shook hands, sealing their dark secret. Michael felt a heavy burden settle on his heart, knowing he was crossing a line he never thought he would. But for the sake of his mother, he was willing to do what it took. When David got home, he found Anointed sitting in their living room, her expression a mix of concern and lingering love. He walked up to her, taking her hands in his. I'm sorry for how I've been. I've changed, he said earnestly, forcing a sincerity he didn't feel. Tonight, we're going to have a wonderful time together as husband and wife. But first, we need to drink a little. Anointed's eyes widened in surprise. Drink? But you know alcohol is against our faith. I don't drink, and I won't start now. David stepped closer, his voice softening, attempting to manipulate her. I love you so much, my wife. This is important to me. Alcohol will help me with some things. If you really love me, you will support me. People are talking behind our backs about not having children. Let's put an end to their gossip. Anointed hesitated, her heart torn. She desperately wanted to support her husband, but she also knew this went against everything she believed in, every moral fiber of her being. Finally, feeling the immense pressure of his words and the suffocating weight of their difficult situation, she reluctantly agreed. Fine, but just a little. They went to the kitchen, and David poured 2 glasses. Unbeknownst to Anointed, he had filled her glass with alcohol, but had secretly been drinking water himself. "Cheers," he said, raising his glass with a forced smile. Anointed raised her glass, and they both took a sip. At first she felt uneasy, but David kept encouraging her. "Just relax, my love. This will help us." As the night went on, they drank more, and Anointed began to feel lightheaded, then drowsy. The alcohol made her sleepy, and soon she was struggling to keep her eyes open. "David, I'm feeling so tired," she mumbled before she finally fell asleep on the couch. David walked over to the door and opened it, allowing Michael to step inside. Michael wasted no time and immediately took control of the situation with Anointed. Meanwhile, David was in the next room, tears streaming down his face as he cried bitterly. The sounds of what was happening were almost too much for him to bear, a grotesque symphony of his own depravity. When Michael finally finished and left, David felt utterly devastated. He slumped to the floor, questioning his entire life. Choices? What kind of life is this? What have I gotten myself into? He thought, feeling a profound sense of regret and sorrow. As dawn broke, Anointed woke up, her head pounding from the excessive alcohol. She was furious. "Why did you give me so much to drink?" she demanded, her voice filled with anger. "Don't ever do that again." David, consumed with guilt and remorse, quickly apologized. "I'm so sorry, Anointed. I didn't mean for things to get out of hand. It won't happen again, I promise." At church the next day, Michael walked up to David after the service, looking upset. "Prophet David," he said quietly, "I need to talk to you about the money we talked about." David turned to him and acted innocent. "What about it?" Michael crossed his arms. "You promised me some money for helping you. I thought you would pay me now since I've done my part." David shook his head. "No, not yet. My wife has to be pregnant first, before I give you anything." Michael's eyes got wide. "What do you mean? That's not what we agreed on. I helped you with this plan. I should get paid now." David's face grew serious, his voice dropping to a low, warning tone. "Listen, Michael, I don't have time for this. You knew the deal. Anointed has to be pregnant or I can't pay you. It's that simple." "But I took a risk for this," Michael said, getting increasingly frustrated. "What if someone finds out? What if this goes wrong? You're putting me in a bad spot." David stepped closer and spoke quietly, menacingly. "You agreed to help me. You need this money for your mom's hospital bills. Don't act like you didn't want to do it." Michael hesitated, looking confused. He really needed the money, but he was terrified of getting caught. "I thought I would get something for my trouble," he said quietly. David sighed and ran his hand through his hair. "I'll make it worth it. I promise. Just focus on getting her pregnant first. Once she's expecting, I'll give you your share. You'll see." With that, David turned away, leaving Michael feeling frustrated and utterly cheated. He felt trapped in a plan that was becoming more complicated and dangerous every day. For the next few nights, David continued his twisted plan with Anointed. He would persuade her to drink with him, telling her it was the only way he could be a good husband, the only way to save their marriage from the prying eyes of the congregation. Reluctantly, Anointed would agree, though she still felt a deep unease about it. She loved David and desperately wanted to make their marriage work, so she went along with his wishes. Once she was deep asleep from the intoxicating effects of the alcohol, Michael would come in, as secretly arranged by David. Under the dark cover of night, he would have his way with her, taking advantage of the situation without her ever knowing. Each night, David would play along with the vile charade, keeping up the appearance of a loving husband who was just trying to make things right. After a few weeks of this horrific routine, Anointed began to feel strange. She felt tired all the time, and soon she started feeling sick in the mornings. Worried, she went to the doctor, who confirmed that she was indeed pregnant. Excited, Anointed rushed home to tell David the joyous news. "I'm pregnant," she announced with unbridled joy, feeling her heart swell with happiness at the thought of finally starting a family. David put on a big smile and hugged her, acting overjoyed. "Finally," he exclaimed as he embraced her. He then called his father and proudly shared the news, declaring, "You're going to be a grandfather soon." David's father was absolutely overjoyed, thrilled that their family would soon be growing. On Sunday, David stood before his congregation, brimming with pride and completely ignoring Anointed's quiet request to keep the pregnancy private. He raised his hands to quiet the crowd and announced, "I have wonderful news to share with you all. My dear wife, Anointed, is expecting a child." The congregation erupted in thunderous cheers and applause. People were overjoyed, clapping and calling out blessings for the soon-to-be parents. Some came forward after the service, congratulating them and showering them with well wishes. It was as if David's announcement had lifted a great weight from the church. All the gossip and whispers of doubt began to fade, replaced by genuine excitement for the prophet's growing family. After the service, Michael quietly slipped into David's office, keeping his voice low as he offered his congratulations. "Congratulations, prophet," he said, forcing a smile as he nervously clasped his hands together. "I'm really happy for you and Anointed." David nodded, barely looking up as he gathered his things. Michael took a deep breath and continued, "About the money you promised to pay me once the news was confirmed. My mother's surgery is scheduled soon, and I need the money urgently." David turned and waved him off, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "Don't worry, Michael. I'll make sure you're taken care of," he said dismissively. "Come back next week, and we'll talk." Michael's face fell, a mix of worry and frustration flashing across his features. "But, Prophet, the hospital says my mother can't wait another week. Please, you promised." David's smile faded, replaced by a stern, icy look. "I said next week. Be patient, Michael, don't you trust me?" he replied, his tone chillingly dismissive. Michael swallowed hard, feeling utterly defeated. He knew it would be pointless to argue further, so he left the office quietly, though his heart felt heavy with worry and crushing frustration. As he walked out of the church, he wondered how much longer he could keep waiting while his mother needed him the most. 2 days later, Michael's world came crashing down. His mother, who had been holding on in the hospital, passed away. The news shattered him. She was gone, all because he couldn't get the money he had desperately needed for her surgery. Grief and uncontrollable anger filled his heart as he sat in his small room clutching a worn photo of her. Tears streamed down his face, and his mind raced with painful memories and searing regrets. In a fit of pure rage and sorrow, he grabbed his phone and dialed Prophet David's number. The moment David answered, Michael's voice erupted, roaring with unbridled fury. "Are you happy now, prophet? My mother is dead. She's gone because you broke your promise. All this pain, all this shame, it's all because of you." There was a tense silence on the other end before David finally replied, his voice unnervingly calm and cold. "Michael, mind your words. Remember who you're speaking to." Michael's grief turned into pure, incandescent anger. "You call yourself a man of God? You promised to help, and when I needed you the most, you ignored me. You've lied to everyone, including your own wife, and used me like some puppet. Well, no more. I'll tell everyone what you made me do. I'll expose the truth, and people will know the real you." David's voice dropped to a menacing, chilling tone. "Think carefully, Michael. If you open your mouth about this, there will be consequences, and don't test me. If you speak a single word about our agreement, you will regret it." Michael clenched his fists, feeling a shiver run down his spine, but his anger, hot and all-consuming, overpowered his fear. "Do you think I care anymore? I've lost everything. I have nothing left to lose. I will do whatever it takes to make sure people see who you really are." David let out a cold, humorless laugh. "Then prepare yourself, Michael. If you go against me, you'll meet the same fate as anyone who dares to cross me. You will not live to tell that story." The phone call ended, leaving Michael standing alone, trembling with a potent mix of rage and terror. He felt utterly trapped, torn between his burning desire to reveal the truth and the terrifying threat David had just made. Late that night, David sat alone in his dimly lit office, his mind racing with fear and anger. He knew Michael could ruin everything if he spoke, but the only one who could truly help him was the Great One. Desperate, David closed his eyes and called out, "Great One! Great One! Great One!" A chilling, unnatural wind swept through the room, and the old man appeared, his eyes glinting with dark amusement. "Why have you called me, David?" he asked, his voice as smooth and cold as ice. David clenched his fists, his face filled with grim determination. "Great One, Michael has betrayed me. He wants to expose our secret. I need him. Gone forever." The old man raised a brow, a sly, knowing smile creeping onto his face. "You wish for Michael's death, then?" "Yes," David replied without hesitation, his voice hard with resolve. "He can't ruin everything I've worked for." The old man's smile faded, replaced by a grave, unsettling expression. "Nothing in this world comes without a price, David. You know that. If I am to take Michael's life, there is something you must sacrifice." David swallowed hard, a lump forming in his throat. "What is it?" The old man's eyes darkened, and he spoke slowly, each word a cold, sharp blade. "The life growing inside your wife. Her pregnancy must be given up. That is the cost." David felt his heart twist with agonizing pain. This was his long-awaited child, the one he had paraded before his congregation, the one meant to quell the whispers and solidify his facade. The thought of losing the baby struck him like a physical blow, but he couldn't see another way. If Michael exposed the truth, he would lose everything: the church, his power, his reputation, every shred of his carefully constructed life. Taking a shaky, ragged breath, David looked the old man squarely in the eyes. "Do it." The old man grinned, a wicked satisfaction spreading across his face. He raised his hand and murmured something under his breath. Words in a language David didn't understand, ancient and dark. The room seemed to fill with a thick, ominous mist, as the old man's words echoed and twisted around them. Then, as quickly as the mist appeared, it vanished. The old man lowered his hand, his eyes gleaming with cold victory. "It is done," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Michael will not see the light of another day. But remember, David, you have paid a heavy price." The old man disappeared, leaving David alone in the profound silence. The next morning, news of Michael's death spread like wildfire. People whispered about how he had been found lifeless, with no explanation for his sudden passing. David's heart pounded with a strange, unsettling mixture of relief and fear. Relief that his secret was safe, but fear at the unimaginable price he had just paid. Later that evening, Anointed collapsed at home, clutching her stomach in agony. She was rushed to the hospital, but the doctors could do nothing. She had lost the baby. When David arrived and saw her lying in the hospital bed, her face pale and her eyes filled with tears, a sharp pang of guilt twisted in his chest. She reached for his hand, her voice barely a whisper. "Why did this happen, David? Our baby—" David forced himself to hold her hand, but he couldn't bring himself to look into her eyes. He mumbled, "It must be God's will," trying to sound calm. But inside he was haunted by the unspeakable truth he could never tell. It wasn't long before whispers spread, like wildfire through the town. The two women David had previously banned from his church, the same ones he had humiliated in front of the congregation, started spreading rumors again. Everywhere they went, they would lean in close and speak in hushed, conspiratorial tones, eagerly feeding the fire of gossip that spread through the town. One of the women, Auntie Clara, shook her head knowingly as she spoke to her neighbors. "Didn't I tell you all?" she whispered, her eyes wide with feigned concern. "I knew something wasn't right with that prophet. His wife loses a baby just like that. Do you think that's normal? No, that baby was a sacrifice. He used that poor child for rituals." Beside her, Mama Binta, who had once been one of David's most loyal followers, nodded vigorously. "Ah, I believe you now, Clara. I didn't see it before, but now it's clear. I mean, how can a man's church grow so fast and then this tragedy happens? It's not natural. My sister, it's not. Thank God we stopped going to his church. Who knows what he might have done to us, too?" They went from house to house, telling anyone who would listen. "Be careful. Oh, that prophet is not who he seems. I heard that his wife's family is suffering because of him and she's too blinded to see it," Auntie Clara would say, shaking her head sadly. Mama Binta added fuel to the fire, her voice laced with spite. "Yes, I even heard that he doesn't even sleep at night. Who knows what evil he's plotting when everyone else is resting? I thank God we left that church before he used us for his dark deeds." People who had once admired Prophet David began to look at him differently. Some of his congregation started whispering among themselves, exchanging nervous glances whenever he walked by. Mothers held their children closer, and people who used to greet him warmly now crossed the street to avoid him. Meanwhile, David heard the rumors but tried desperately to ignore them, telling himself it was just the work of jealous people. But deep down, the gossip stung. He could feel his once loyal followers slipping through his fingers like sand, and it scared him. He noticed the empty seats growing in the church on Sundays, the way some people came but pointedly avoided looking at him. At night, David lay awake, haunted by guilt and pervasive fear. He had gained everything he wanted: power, success, a large following, but now it felt like it was all slipping away. The ominous words of the Great One echoed relentlessly in his mind, reminding him of the terrible, irreversible choices he had made. As David lay on his bed, his mind racing, the Great One appeared in a swirling cloud of dark mist. His presence instantly filled the room with an icy, suffocating chill, and his eyes glowed with a menacing, fiery red light. He looked down at David with a twisted, cruel smile that sent shivers down David's spine. "David," he said, his voice echoing with a darkness that seemed to make the very walls tremble. "Do you know why your church is losing members? It's because of me. You turned your back on your promises. Now, if you wish to keep your power, you must offer me 2 more sacrifices: your father and your wife." David's heart raced, profound dread filling his chest. He shook his head, his face pale with raw fear. "No," he whispered, his voice trembling uncontrollably. "I will never harm them. I don't care about this power anymore. I'm tired. I'm done with all of this. Let it end. If it means I have to die, then so be it." The Great One's face twisted in an explosion of fury, his eyes blazing with incandescent rage. "How dare you, ungrateful soul! After all I've given you, this is how you repay me? Very well. If you refuse me, you will lose everything you hold dear." David's jaw tightened, his face set in a defiant mask. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," he declared, his voice surprisingly firm, despite his fear. "I will confess everything. I'll tell the world the truth. I'll expose you and every terrible thing you made me do. This ends now." The Great One's cruel smile faded, replaced by an expression of cold, terrifying anger. "You think you can speak against me? You think anyone will believe you?" With a swift, powerful wave of his hand, an invisible force struck David. His mouth opened to scream, but no sound came out. He tried to shout, to call for help, but no words formed. He couldn't hear anything either. Everything had gone utterly silent. The Great One's voice, devoid of all warmth, filled his mind one last chilling time. "From this moment on, you are mute. You are deaf. You will never speak again, nor hear the sound of your own voice. I leave you in your silence. May it be your prison forever." David collapsed to the floor, tears streaming uncontrollably down his face. He tried to cry out, to call for help, but no words came. Pure panic gripped him, and he reached up to desperately touch his mouth, hoping this waking nightmare would end. But it was real. He was deaf and dumb, trapped in a silence so deep that he could hear nothing but the frantic pounding of his own heart. Anointed, hearing a muffled noise, rushed into the room. She found David curled up on the floor, his face wet with tears, his hands shaking uncontrollably. She knelt beside him, alarmed by the profound pain and raw fear in his eyes. "David, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice gentle but full of worry. But David couldn't hear her. He couldn't even see her lips clearly through his blinding tears. She reached out trying to comfort him, but he pulled back, frustrated and utterly broken. "Please, tell me what's happening. Why are you crying?" Anointed urged, her voice trembling with concern. Desperate to explain, David opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. His face crumpled in despair, and he shook his head, utterly unable to share the torment that had just befallen him. He covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, agonizing sobs. Anointed held him, feeling utterly helpless, her own eyes filling with tears. "I don't understand," she whispered, her heart aching at the sight of her husband in such anguish. "What happened to you? Please, let me in. I want to help you." David looked up at her, his eyes wide and desperate. He tried to sign, to gesture the horrors that had unfolded, but his hands trembled too much to convey anything meaningful. He mouthed words she couldn't understand, his eyes pleading for her to grasp the enormity of his pain. The silence hung heavy in the air, oppressive and absolute, and Anointed felt a deep, chilling sense of dread. She had never seen David like this. The man she married was strong and confident, a leader who had inspired so many. But now, he seemed like a fragile shadow of his former self, burdened by unspeakable secrets and paralyzing fear. "David, please," she begged, trying to catch his desperate gaze. "I can't help if you don't tell me what's wrong. I love you. Whatever it is, we can face it together." In that moment, David felt a fleeting flicker of hope. Maybe he could find a way to tell her, to share the terrifying truth of what had happened. But as he looked into her concerned eyes, the crushing weight of his choices pressed down on him. How could he possibly reveal the unfathomable darkness he had embraced? How could he tell her that their lives were now irrevocably entangled in a web of deceit, horror, and profound suffering? Instead, he took her hands and held them tightly. He desperately wanted to reassure her, to let her know he was still there, that he loved her, but the words remained locked inside him, and the oppressive silence felt like iron chains that bound him to his horrific fate. Suddenly, there was a loud, jarring crash from outside. Anointed jumped to her feet, alarmed. "What was that?" she asked, her voice trembling. David felt the urgency in her tone and wanted to warn her, to protect her from the unknown danger that might be coming from the Great One. He tried to stand, but the sheer weight of despair held him down. Anointed turned towards the door, and David instinctively grabbed her arm. She looked back at him, her eyes wide with confusion. He wanted to scream at her, to command her to stay inside, to shield her from whatever malevolent darkness now loomed outside. But he was trapped, utterly powerless in his silence. With a determined, albeit fearful look, Anointed pushed the door open and stepped out into the night. David's heart raced as he stumbled after her. The chilling bite of the night air sent shivers down his spine. Outside, ominous shadows danced under the moonlight, elongated and distorted, and the whispers of the wind seemed to carry a dire warning. Anointed looked around, her expression a mix of curiosity and growing concern. "David, what is happening?" she called out, her voice laced with trepidation, but he couldn't answer. He felt a deepening, suffocating sense of fear as the very atmosphere thickened with a strange, malevolent energy. Suddenly, the Great One's chilling laugh echoed in the air, cold and mocking, resonating with a terrifying power. "You think you can escape your fate?" he taunted, materializing from the shadows, his presence overwhelming. Anointed gasped, stepping back in fright, but David, fueled by instinct, moved forward, trying to shield her. "Stay away from her!" he tried to shout, but the silence wrapped around him like a suffocating shroud. The Great One's eyes glinted with amusement as he surveyed David's helplessness. "You have lost your voice, but you still believe you can fight back." Anointed looked frantically between David and the terrifying figure, fear flashing across her face. "Who are you?" she demanded, standing firm despite the dread creeping into her heart. "I am the one who holds your husband's fate," the Great One replied, his voice dripping with malice. "And soon I will take everything from you both." "David!" Anointed cried, reaching for him. But the Great One raised his hand, and dark shadows swirled violently around her. David could only watch in horror as Anointed stumbled back, caught in a swirling web of dark, oppressive energy. "No!" David mouthed, desperation flooding his heart. He stepped forward, attempting to break the invisible barrier that kept him from reaching her, but the darkness pushed him back, an unyielding, powerful force separating them. "Your time is up, David," the Great One said, his voice cold and cruel. "I gave you power, and I will take it away. If you will not make the sacrifices I demand, you will lose everything you love." David fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. He felt utterly powerless, torn between the love for his wife and the unspeakable horrors he had faced. As Anointed struggled against the encroaching shadows, he could only wish to protect her, to keep her safe from the insidious evil that threatened to destroy them both. Anointed, however, found an unexpected surge of courage. She stood up, feeling a profound mix of fear and unwavering determination. She took a deep breath and began to pray, uttering strong Bible verses that echoed with unexpected power in the night air. "God gives us power to fight against evil," she declared, her voice steady and surprisingly strong. The Great One merely laughed, his voice chilling and mocking. "You think you can hurt me? I have destroyed many like you. I am darkness, and you are just a tiny light. You cannot challenge me." Anointed didn't let his words intimidate her. She continued to pray, her voice rising with unwavering conviction. "I am a child of God. I stand on His promises. You evil spirit, I command you to go away right now." Her voice grew louder, filled with strength that derived from her profound faith. As the suffocating darkness surrounded her, she shouted, "No weapon formed against me will win." The ground shook subtly, and the oppressive shadows seemed to recoil from her, surprised by her unexpected spiritual strength. The Great One's chilling laughter began to fade as he realized she was not afraid. "You cannot defeat me! I am forever!" he yelled, his voice laced with frustration. But Anointed didn't give up. She kept praying, her voice rising with an incredible power. "Let God arise, and let his enemies be scattered," she shouted, the words coming from the very core of her heart, imbued with pure faith. The dark shadows began to visibly fade away, flickering and receding, and the Great One stumbled back, looking angry and genuinely shocked. "What is happening? No! This cannot be!" he cried out, his voice now tinged with desperation. Anointed kept going, her resolve unbroken. "You will not hurt my husband or anyone else! Your time is over! I command you to leave and never come back!" With one last fervent prayer, she raised her hands high. "By the blood of Jesus, I break your hold over us. In his name, I destroy you." Suddenly, a brilliant, blinding light filled the room, shining with the intensity of the sun itself. The Great One screamed in unadulterated anger as the light enveloped him. "No! This cannot be! I will not go!" he shrieked, his voice filled with impotent rage. But the light grew brighter and brighter, consuming him. Then, with a deafening crash, the Great One vanished, his evil presence gone forever. The oppressive, heavy feeling that had filled the room lifted instantly, and David suddenly felt warm and vibrantly alive again. He gasped, hearing the sound of his own breath. The agonizing silence was gone, and he could hear everything again. He looked at Anointed, who was now glowing with an ethereal joy. "David!" she cried, her voice full of overwhelming happiness. He rushed to her and wrapped his arms around her tightly, holding her as if his life depended on it. They were both filled with an indescribable thankfulness and a renewed, profound love. "I thought I lost you," David said, tears freely rolling down his cheeks. "I couldn't speak or hear, but you saved me." He held her close, feeling an unparalleled happiness to be together again, truly together. "I was scared too, but I knew God was with us," Anointed replied, her voice shaking a little, yet strong and resolute. "Together we can face anything. Nothing can stop the power of God." They hugged each other tightly, feeling incredibly strong and united. They knew, with a certainty that settled deep in their souls, that they were not alone and that God was undeniably with them, giving them boundless strength. "Let's rebuild our lives," David said, looking into her eyes, which were now full of newfound hope. "We will use this power for good. We will help others who are suffering." "Yes," Anointed agreed, her voice bright and full of determination. "We will share our story. We will help others find the strength we found." At that moment, they both knew their true journey was just beginning. With God by their side, they could truly face anything. A few months later, Anointed began to notice some subtle changes. She felt tired more often, her appetite grew, and she experienced a fluttery, almost magical feeling in her stomach. She wondered with a soaring heart if it could mean she was finally pregnant. Every single day, she thought about it, and her heart filled with a radiant hope. One morning, she decided to visit the clinic to confirm her suspicions. David went with her, feeling nervous, but also incredibly excited. They held hands tightly, both hoping, praying for good news. After a few tests, the doctor came back with a gentle, confirming smile. "Congratulations, Anointed," the doctor said. "You're pregnant." Anointed's eyes filled with tears of pure joy. She looked at David, who was grinning with immense pride and excitement. "We're going to be parents," she whispered, barely able to believe it. David hugged her tightly. This is a blessing," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I'm so grateful." Later, as the weeks passed and her belly began to beautifully grow, they decided to go for an ultrasound to check on the baby's development. The doctor moved the scanner gently over her stomach, and a clear, unmistakable image appeared on the screen. Then the doctor's face lit up with an even wider smile. "Anointed, David! You're having twins!" Their hearts overflowed with an unimaginable joy. Twins! They couldn't believe how incredibly blessed they were. Anointed and David hugged, their dreams of a family now twice as wonderful, twice as abundant as they had ever dared to imagine. They left the clinic hand in hand, looking forward with boundless anticipation to the joyful, blessed journey ahead with their two little miracles. David woke up, breathing fast and raggedly. He looked around and realized he was safe in his own room. The night before, with its terrifying ordeal, felt so incredibly real. Strange old man, the sacrifices and all the dark choices he'd made in his dream. He sat up, thinking about the power he loved so much. "Thank God. It was just a dream," he muttered, but there was a strange, unsettling feeling inside him. He knew he loved being in control, having people listen to him, and being respected by everyone. It felt good to be important, to have people look up to him. The next morning, David dressed in his finest suit, feeling strong and powerful. He arrived at church with a confident smile, greeting his congregation. The church was full, and as he stood at the front, he felt everyone's eyes on him, listening closely to his every word. During the sermon, David looked out at his members. "Brothers and sisters," he said in a loud, powerful voice. "I have a special message today." He paused, letting the silence fill the room. "We need to expand our church. We need a new building, a bigger place where we can all gather together and worship." The people nodded, some even clapping in agreement. David raised his hand, calling for quiet again. "But to build this house of God," he continued, his voice ringing with authority, "we need donations. I am asking each one of you to give generously. We need 500 million naira to make this vision come true." Some people looked around, whispering nervously, and others looked surprised. It was a truly massive amount of money. David held up his hand again, and everyone fell silent. "Remember, this is for God's house," he said firmly, his gaze sweeping across the congregation. "Even if it's your last money, I ask you to give to God. This is a holy offering. God will bless you for it. He will bless your homes, your families, and your lives in ways you cannot imagine." Some people looked worried, but David kept talking, his voice steady, compelling. "Trust in the Lord. Give all that you can. This is your chance to show your faith, to show that you trust in God to provide for you. Give from your heart, and you will see the blessings come back to you 100 times over." As he looked out at the crowd, he could see people reaching for their wallets, digging into their pockets, and murmuring to each other. David's heart raced with excitement. He loved this feeling, knowing that his words had the power to move people, to make them give everything they had. He watched as people came forward one by one, placing their money in the offering box. Some gave small bills, some gave large bills, and a few even took off their jewelry, adding it to the pile. David felt proud, standing there as his congregation sacrificed to make his vision come true. But as he watched the offerings pile up, he couldn't help but remember the strange dream he'd had. In the back of his mind, a tiny voice asked, "Is this really what God wants, or is it just what you want?" But he pushed the thought away, smiling and thanking his people as they gave. He felt powerful, respected, and completely in control. David looked over his congregation, his voice ringing out louder than ever. "My people, understand this. If you hold back from giving to the building of the Lord, you shall know no peace in your life," he declared, his face stern, his eyes intense. A hush fell over the church. Everyone could feel the weighty implication of his words. "If you don't have enough money," he continued, his voice unwavering, "borrow it. If you have clothes, sell them. If you have gold, bring it here. Even sell your car if you must. This is a chance to prove your faith." Some of the congregation looked at each other with wide eyes, uncertain, but listening intently. David's words echoed through the building as he raised his hands, his voice filled with an almost hypnotic conviction. "The Lord will bless you for this. He will see your sacrifice and reward you. Your life will be transformed in ways you can't even imagine if you make this offering from your heart." A few people nodded, while others seemed hesitant, fidgeting in their seats. But David's powerful tone and unwavering gaze held them captive. He continued, "This is a test of faith. Think of the blessings that will rain down upon you. What's a little sacrifice now if it means a lifetime of abundance? Trust in the Lord's plan for you." Some members stood up, visibly moved by his words, already reaching for their belongings, looking ready to do exactly as he'd asked. An elderly woman clutched her worn handbag, her hands shaking as she pulled out the last few bills she had. A young man, uncertain but clearly feeling the persuasive power of David's words, whispered to his wife, "Maybe we should sell the car. It's for the Lord." David watched with satisfaction, a proud smile spreading across his face. His words had ignited a fervent fire in his followers. He felt utterly in control, powerful, and deeply respected. After the service, a few church members gathered quietly outside, glancing around to make sure no one overheard their hushed conversation. One woman sighed, shaking her head in frustration. This man, David, who calls himself a prophet, he's always talking about money. Every Sunday, it's another donation, another offering. Yet, he never seems to give anything back to us, his own church members. Look at the mansion he lives in, the fancy cars he drives, and the expensive suits he wears. Does he even help anyone in need around here? Another member nodded, her face troubled. Exactly. Some of us can barely afford food, yet he's asking us to empty our pockets every week. Does he even know what it's like to struggle? Meanwhile, he's living in luxury, while some of us have to decide between giving to the church and feeding our children. A man in the group added quietly, "My wife and I gave everything we could for that last offering. But since then, we've been struggling even more. My wife thinks we're just not praying hard enough. But I don't know. I feel like something is off. How can this truly be God's will?" Another woman whispered, her voice filled with a dawning realization. "My husband has been warning me about this church. He says it's not right that any real prophet wouldn't be living so high and mighty while his people suffer. He told me to stop coming here, but I kept believing that maybe David was truly blessed. I'm starting to wonder if I was wrong." The first woman sighed deeply, her face filled with profound sadness. "I think I might stop coming too. I only stayed to see the miracles, to see if he really has God's power, but lately even the miracles feel strange. I don't feel closer to God here. I just feel pressured." The man shook his head slowly. "Maybe he is blessed, maybe he's not, but I don't understand how he can ask so much from people who have so little. Isn't a true leader supposed to care for his people, to lift them up when they're down?" They all fell silent, looking back at the church building, feeling a confusing mix of doubt and disappointment. What had once felt like a place of hope now felt uncertain. They exchanged glances, each lost in thought, questioning everything they had once believed about Prophet David. David got home, his face calm, but inside, he was still shaken from the dream. He stepped into the living room, and his wife, anointed, immediately noticed the tension in his eyes. "Honey," she said softly, reaching out to him. "What happened last night? I heard you screaming in your sleep. You were tossing and turning so much. I was worried." David hesitated, forcing a small smile to cover his unease. "Oh, it was just a bad dream," he said, choosing his words carefully. "The devil tried to make me leave God. He wanted me to abandon my faith, to let go of the path God has called me to. But I didn't give in. I fought back. I defeated him. The devil can't touch me." Anointed's eyes widened, and she clasped her hands together in profound relief. She raised her voice, overcome with gratitude. "Praise the Lord. Thank you, Lord, for protecting my husband. Thank you for making him a holy prophet. I'm so proud of you, my love. You're truly chosen by God." David's smile didn't quite reach his eyes as he took in his wife's pure joy. She looked at him with such admiration, such blind trust. She saw him as a man of God, a leader blessed by heaven itself. But he knew the chilling truth, buried deep inside, hidden behind every sermon, every miracle, every moment he spent in front of his devoted followers. As Anointed continued to praise God for her holy husband, David looked away, his heart heavy with an unbearable guilt. Deep down, he knew that the devil had not come for him in a dream. He had willingly walked into the darkness on his own, trading